Well, good afternoon, good evening. This is a phenomenal crowd for 5 o'clock on the last day of a multi-day event. I think it's a real testament. It's either if you guys are just exhausted and just want to decompress and you're looking forward to another night in Vegas, or you're genuinely interested in what our panelists have here to say. We really have a fantastic panel of venture capitalists, very savvy cloud investors who are going to share with everyone their thoughts on investing in the cloud economy. My name is Brad Steele. I'm a business development manager on the venture capital and startup team at Amazon. Prior to turning it over to our panelists to introduce themselves, I just want to understand a little more about the crowd, just by a show of hands, kind of going backwards here. How many people here are representing large enterprises or Fortune 1000-ish companies? Just curious. Oh, wow, that's fantastic. Excellent. How many are startups or developers? I suspect everybody else. How many of you are looking to raise capital in the next, call it 6 to 18 months? Is your deal flow? Done? Beautiful. Well, despite what you might believe, these guys do not have cash in their pockets, but they do have checkbooks burning holes in their pockets, and they are looking for deals. Let's go ahead and, one point, I would like to say, we want to keep this very interactive and make it fun, and this is the end of a long week. So rather than just leaving questions at the end, we're going to open up the questions, allow you to ask questions throughout the panel. We've got a handful of topics we want to cover, but hopefully we can get through them all. But please feel free to raise your hand and ask questions, and I'll try to take a few during each phase. So without further ado, why don't we, if you guys go ahead and introduce yourselves. Matt?
So my name is Matt Mcilwain, and I'm a managing director at the Madrona Venture Group. We are based in Seattle. We do early stage information technology investing across the spectrum. Probably best known for being the first investors in Amazon. My partner Tom Alberg's still on the board today. But we've also done things like Isilon and Apptio and Classmates and other fun stuff over the years like that as well.
I'm Ann Winblad, recovering software developer and entrepreneur, but I became a venture capitalist in 1989 as co-founder of Hummer Winblad Venture Partners. We fund exclusively software companies and almost all B2B or enterprise or core software. We fund at the early stage. We're the first investors in most companies. We funded a number of notable companies that were 2 to 3 person startups like Hyperion, Omniture, Wind River, the list goes on. There's about 120 of them since we've been in business for 23 years.
I'm Michael Skok, been an entrepreneur for 21 years, and then the last decade became a VC. And lucky enough to have been backed by the same people who, work with the same people who backed me for those 20 years. So it's sort of been a continuous run. The firm is Northbridge, and it's a national venture firm, both Boston and West Coast offices in the Valley. And the focus is on really high-touch, very active early-stage investing. So for us, that means usually, well, just pick an example, actually, since they got announced today. So a company like Acquia, which is backing the Drupal open source project, started as an idea in our office, and that's how we like to do things. We'll actually spend about 3 months working on the project before we seeded it, and then we've done the Series A, B, C, D, E as the lead investor. And that's kind of what we like to do, be very early, very active, and try to build real companies.
I'm Matt Miller, and I'm a partner at Sequoia Capital.
Does it like Sequoia?
Anyways, I'm Matt Miller. I'm a partner at Sequoia Capital. We are early and growth and all-stage investors of private companies. Across the technology space. Myself in particular, I focus on enterprise technology, spending a little bit more of my time in the growth stage, which is companies once they have revenue and are working on scaling their businesses. But we have a very active early stage investment business as well, and have worked with a number of great technology companies over our 40-year history, from Apple and Cisco in the early days to more recently companies like Google and LinkedIn and or ServiceNow or Palo Alto Networks. Before Sequoia, I was an advisor. I worked at Goldman Sachs, where I helped launch and co-lead their cloud computing investment banking business. So got to work with a number of my panelists here in my past life, and work with a lot of young cloud companies that were up and coming, as well as companies trying to figure out, enterprises trying to figure out what to do about the cloud and how to enhance their strategies around cloud computing. So happy to be here.
Great, thank you. Thank you. So I think we'd all agree in the room that cloud computing and AWS has had a pretty transformational impact on the startup world. It's transformed business models. It's transformed how companies go to market, how they reach their customers, how they sell. how companies form teams and develop products and test and dev and so forth. It's dramatic impact. So love to hear how along with the growth in cloud computing, how your investment thesis has evolved over the last, call it 5 to 7 years. Matt, why don't we start here?
I mean, I think that the core investment thesis of Sequoia has not changed as a result of cloud. Given our history and has always been, and our goal has always been, we want to partner with really brilliant entrepreneurs that are looking to build defining companies that are going to disrupt large markets and have great market opportunities associated with them. That being said, I think that the cloud has, there's two things in particular the cloud has changed about our thinking about our companies and that we partner with and invest with. And one is the speed at which they can come to the market and the speed at which they can grow and come to really change the market and gain dominance and gain scale. And I just think of companies like Airbnb and Dropbox that are two clients of AWS that really could not have scaled near as quickly or gained the dominance or size that they were able to had it not been for cloud technologies. And so when we're thinking about investments, we're no longer as cautious, we're not as cautious as we once were about the physical infrastructure scaling requirements associated with our business. And I think that the second thing that has changed is the whole cloud era has brought in this notion of recurring revenues. And it's something that we encourage all of our portfolio companies, even ones that are out of the traditional software vertical, to do, is to develop some component of their business that's recurring in nature or a hosted application. I think of companies like Meraki. There's many things that make that company very special, but one of them is that they developed a hosted application that they put in the cloud that managed all of their Wi-Fi devices across your implementation. And that was one of the things that helped them to have a much higher recurring revenue component than their competitors and was very attractive to Cisco as they were thinking about who they wanted to acquire to continue to accelerate and grow their business. And so we've tried to make recurring revenues a theme we encourage all of our companies to pursue through some form or another or hosted technologies.
Michael, how about you?
Well, let me ask the crowd first. There's two ways I'd answer that question, either in terms of opportunities we see coming up in the cloud. So hands up for who'd like to hear that. Opportunities we see, not many. A few more. Okay, well, the other. So you're hedging your bets. You must have been gambling. The other is how we think about building businesses differently. So hands up for building businesses differently. Okay, I think there's more for the opportunities. I'll cover that. So on the opportunities side, we think there are 5 cloud formations, and these 5 are really the opportunity. And in fact, the intersection at the core of them, we think is probably where the most interesting companies will start. So I'll just quickly cover them. There's media and entertainment. There's social and collaboration. There's e-commerce and payments. And then there is what we consider to be the sort of exhaust of all of that, and that's big data. And I skipped one. Forgive me while I recap on my notes here for a second. What did I miss? Oh, obvious one, mobile and location. So if you think about those 5 cloud formations, what's interesting about them is almost none of them really exist without what we're getting in the way of infrastructure as a service in the cloud today. So for example, mobile without cloud is useless. I mean, these devices just don't mean anything unless you can connect to them. But when you get the cloud formations together, you get really interesting things. So imagine, and most of this is actually even possible today, we just aren't really fully exploiting it. Imagine starting a company today where with a mobile device, which is tracking your location, it can obviously pick up from big data that's been created about you, recommendations from your friends about what it is they think you should be buying in the location you're at, transact that over the cloud via e-commerce, and then obviously keep track of that data for recommendations in the future. All of that is possible because of the cloud connecting all of those disparate commerce and location and big data and collaboration and so forth aspects now in one place. And so we think the next generation of companies will not be the classic siloed one-off applications. They'll be these loosely coupled services which connect into a much more interesting thread that solves a very real and significant problem from end to end. And so we think it's a fantastic era to be looking at new investments in software and applications that just weren't possible before. And that's what we think of as cloud-native applications as opposed to cloud-washed applications. And we think they're things that just couldn't have been done before. So that's the first part.
So we made our first software as a service investment in 1997 in a company in Atlanta called Employees. It was outsourced benefits management. That company today is a part of ADP. It's about 700 people, large division there, so it's still delivering value. There's a lot of difference between that company built in 1997 and the companies we fund today. clearly we didn't have to build the data center ourselves. We could leverage Amazon. A lot of the components in the cloud stack itself were hand-built by employees. And here, as a new company, many of those components are at commodity pricing and commoditized themselves and part of the core operating environment versus something that you might have to license for large dollars from Oracle or even Microsoft. But really what is different is that the elastic capability of the cloud, both in your pricing model and Amazon's pricing model, allows you to bring a much better value proposition to the customer and allows you to enter closer to the line of business or the user that you're delivering the greatest value to, rather than coming into the center of these companies through the CIO or heavy procurement. So we look at how we start our companies in looking at how do you infiltrate your customer and deliver them value, because you can almost deliver that value free. And this is not just like the old open source free things, but because your cost of delivery is so low. How do you prove value quickly? This is the agility thing that Matt talked about, so that you can then price to value and deliver it as close to the customer itself. That is the landing point. And then how do you expand your value proposition around that customer? So we look at how you build your business model around infiltrate, which is delivery as low cost of value as possible, low cost pricing as possible, yet still delivering value. Land, the value proves itself out, and expand where you are really monetizing your business. We also want you to look at where you belong in that ecosystem, and I think Michael talked about that briefly. 2 years ago, there were only 50 open APIs. By the end of this year, there'll be close to 10,000. So no longer are you going to own the whole SaaS or cloud infrastructure. You should really think about what your market map looks like on day one. So how you integrate, and integration is a big theme for cloud providers, no matter what part of the stack you're providing. How you integrate into the rest of the ecosystem, including some of the very successful companies sooner versus later. And then last but not least, are you actually monetizing your data layer? This is really a new concept, even though it sounds cliched now and even sort of in the hype cycle. But is there more value in your data than the application? And do you really, really understand how to build value at the data level? It's kind of the Wild West out there. There have been a lot of great announcements at this conference, but that will really separate some of the newer, more valuable companies from the previous very successful application companies that were delivered on the cloud.
I'll just add a couple different thoughts. I mean, one of the great news things for everybody in this room is that you can do so much more with so much less. So much more with less capital and less operating focus on terms of the technology stack that you're dealing with. The challenge is that you get out there and you put an application or service out there in the cloud, and a lot of people mistake the early usage of that with being a successful company. They've got a successful service, maybe it's a successful product, but successful only from a usage perspective. And so I think there's a big gap between the build something for $1 million, get it out there, and start that iterative process where you're taking the data that you're getting from learning how your application's being using, and then dialing in the actual business value proposition that you had. So I'll take an example of a company that honestly we passed on initially, which turned out to be a mistake because we had to invest at a higher value later, which was able to figure out the business model by having a cloud service, a company called Boutique. And they help boutique hotels really solve 3 problems. One, we all know that a lot of these vertical markets, it used to be that you got a hard disk drive, and you got a floppy disk drive rather, you got delivered to you, and then every year you got an update on that back-end transaction processing system. And that was kind of the last time the software company really had a conversation, with the boutique hotel. And most of these boutique hotels were running that. In addition, they'd build their first web, front end and, web site interface, and that was done years ago too. And then finally, they really had no clue how to do marketing automation, how to nurture customers online and cultivate them ultimately into hopefully buying customers. And Boutique put all 3 of those value propositions together in the cloud and offered it as a service on a subscription-based model, and has shown that they've been able to do it so well and iterate on the data that they've learned that they've had very, very low churn and been able to expand their market into other geographies and other propositions. So I think that's the key. The gap between thinking because you can now and you can do so much more with less actually translates to a successful business. And a lot of times, folks like us can be helpful in bridging that gap.
Thank you. Very important question. Michael, is that a Kindle, I assume?
Should be a Kindle.
I'm going to have to ask you to security. So just let's talk a little bit about value creation and how your companies build value. There was a time in startup and VC land where you heard a lot about intellectual property, patents, copyrights, these sort of things that we're adding that you looked at for value creation and sustainable competitive differentiation. With cloud, there's been a real movement from patented IP towards more what you referred to, and I love the term, experiential intellectual property. So, and you kind of touched on this, but I want to expand on it. I think it's very important. So how has AWS enabled your companies to think about the utilization of that experiential IP and data analytics in building long-term sustainable competitive advantage and driving value?
Yeah, I'll start with this one. I mean, experiential IP is this concept of because you're learning stuff, you're able to, if you can be not just curious but analytically curious, be able to have a virtuous cycle of that learning coming back into what you're doing next. And in an environment where you can iterate incredibly quickly, you can deliver more fast and always stay ahead of the customer. By the way, our sense is that this conference is going to be a defining moment in the rest of the world, particularly some of those old tech companies that Andy was referring to. It's going to kind of be, quite frankly, I don't use this language very often, kind of their oh shit moment. Like, we have no idea, these big companies, how far behind we were. And now we've heard about and seen this conference and realized how far we're behind. Because AWS has been able to leverage experiential IP. And the companies that we're backing, over 75% of our companies use at least S3 and EC2 in some way as part of their business. We do a survey of this. By the way, one of them uses Azure, and we're in Seattle. And so what that tells me is that they are trying to leverage the compute, the iteration on the software they're developing, and most importantly, the knowledge of the data that they're getting. Not just the data as a cloud offering that they get from operating from scale of the product, but the fact that they know exactly what pages people are using and how long they spend on those pages. They know the types of functions that they engage with on those pages and what leads a customer to be a prospect, turning him from a prospect into a customer that's paying, into a customer that pays at a higher level and then hopefully retains over time. And all of the data around that is instantly accessible to the next generation company. And that kind of experiential IP in that closed loop is incredibly valuable. And if you're not doing that as a legacy company today, you're probably going to find yourself in a world of hurt.
Right.
Well, sure. I would say that we haven't abandoned patents totally. So
Fair, very fair.
We don't want to, you would all go away not patenting
yeah.
anything. It is, it is a process. It costs money, and it should be done judiciously. But a patent is not a competitive advantage. It's just an arrow in your quiver for future warfare, in case you get in it. Realistically, what's happened in analytics, we funded Omniture, which had 6,000 customers, billions of, data elements passing through every day as people adjusted their websites. But even though Omniture appeared real time, it is nothing like what the real-time expectations today are of customers. And if you look at some of Amazon's partners, Netflix, and others, these are companies that have to be always on, that are really pushing the bleeding edge envelope. Or if you go visit with Facebook developers, they have to build stuff themselves that isn't there because of the expectation of the scale and the real-time nature of what the web platform experience is today. And that's something where Amazon has really been an innovator, is the stuff's new, you have to work at it a little bit to figure out, get it to work and whatever, but they are a bleeding edge customer. And for you to actually have a competitive advantage, which is what we fund companies that for a while have an unfair competitive advantage. That means that you're going to be dealing with a higher bar for these next generation applications, both in their real-time or near real-time nature and the granularity which leads to large scale of numbers, whether it is the number of devices or the number of transactions. I'm on the board of Sonotype, which runs a central repository. This year, there'll be over 10 billion transactions on that central repository. That is software developers downloading components. So you can just see the intensity of which software is being built today. That's at the bottom level of software building. So you really have to be working on a platform where the platform provider, which is Amazon, is pushing the bleeding edge of scale.
Great answer. Matt?
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd add to Ann and Matt's comments is, the bar has gotten higher, but when we spend a lot of time with CIOs, and CIOs, their expectations now are far higher of you, of the developer, of the applications you're building. They no longer are willing to accept, oh, well, we can fix this in the next release. Because it's a cloud technology, they know that you can make those changes more quickly. They expect the product experience to be better. They expect the functionality to be better. They expect the compatibility to be better. So it's really been an advantage for companies that can scale quickly, but it's also been a little bit of a hardship in the fact that they now have to be more innovative and move more quickly and more rapidly than entrepreneurs in previous generations had to, because the release cycles are completely gone away. And you look at companies like Workday, that as they built their company over time, I mean, they had hundreds of updates or thousands of updates that they made to the product over the years as they developed their product all the way to where they are now, compared to Oracle, which released 3 or 4 versions in the same period of time. And so the expectation is much higher for companies like a Workday than it is for the legacy companies. And so you're more able to adapt to that because you're nimble and you're young, but it's a different type of thinking that's not been present in software companies in the past.
Michael, anything you'd like to add to that?
Probably not much to add. I'll take a different slant at it, though, so we can try to add some value, because I think these are all good comments, such as, imagine a world which we're not far from, thanks to AWS, where the technology doesn't matter, where basically everybody's on the same advantaged platform. What do you stand out for? I think that's the question to ask yourselves. And I think you're all, sort of hearing the hints at it. You're going to stand out for having a product or service that is that much more compelling at solving a business problem, where every day you can measure, literally, on the fly, whether you're succeeding at delivering that value. And so I think the great thing about this new world order is that we're in a different age. You can get straight to the heart of the problem. You can solve it without being held up by technology, thanks to AWS. And you can measure every nanosecond, if you want to, what it is that you're doing to make a difference. And so I think that's incredibly exciting. And if I were a developer out there today, I'd be trying to jump on, what is it I'm going to do with that incredible new world?
So you touched on a little bit of this, Michael, in your opening, but I think a lot of people here would be very curious to know what areas within software can still be disruptive in the cloud. There's been so much innovation. We keep seeing a lot of deals where you say, wow, how didn't I think of that? Or we also see a lot where you say, gosh, I've seen 10 of these in the last couple of months. Where can we still be innovative in the cloud?
I mean, I think let's start at the top of the stack. The applications that I was mentioning, so I won't go over them again, around those 5 cloud formations and the intersections are really interesting, such as pick one. E-commerce, we think, is still incredibly early. I mean, I think the advent of basically everything being available digitally without any intermediary to anybody and in a form that is personalized to you, where every person that connects with you can give you effectively the recommendation about what's best for you too. I mean, that's hugely disruptive. I think we're really, really early in that. But that's an example, and I think there are many at the top of the stack. And those all being delivered with the simplicity of access from whatever mobile device you use via the cloud, simply personalized to you, I think is just very compelling. But when you have to support all of that, as Amazon knows only too well, you have a lot of technology that has to change, because the traditional scale-up methodology just doesn't work. So although we're thrilled to have people like AWS in play, we also know that to put all the data centers in place, there's a lot of technology at the bottom of the stack that just doesn't work. So, the virtualization of networking or storage or compute or bandwidth, and then all the services on top that are needed to support that. So, for example, just a basic thing like, how does your identity follow you completely seamlessly across all of these services when they're in the cloud? It's really tough stuff. So I think anybody that thinks that this isn't a huge opportunity hasn't looked deep enough. Because all the way from the bottom of the stack right to the top, there are opportunities that are coming from this disruption. And I think we're incredibly early. I mean, it feels to me like we're the first inning. And I think that was well said. I think this is a seminal moment to have this group of people at this event. And hats off to you guys for putting it on, because we'll look back and go, wow, that was just early.
Great. Matt, you have any thoughts?
Yeah, do you want to go ahead?
No, sure, go.
Yeah, I would add two different categories that it's our sense there are big opportunities in. And one is one we kind of throw around the term around the office of DI-Fi, which is the intersection of the digital world and the physical world. The digital world, we've been talking a lot about here, and what you can do in the cloud and the power and the processing capabilities of it. The physical world has an intersection point now, which is generally thought of as a smart device, a smartphone, a smart pad, but it can be a lot of other sensoring devices, whether that's a Fitbit, whether that's a Lumo device. There's a whole spectrum of these kind of devices. And so in a world when people talk about phrases like quantified self, in a world when people want to be able to research something online, take that research with them, and then actually do the transaction in the physical world for instant gratification. There's a whole set of workflows and business processes that can be completely reimagined because of the digital world in the cloud, the connected devices and the sensoring devices, and the rethinking of what you do in the physical world. So that's a big category of opportunities. And there's some examples that are out there, some like a company like ours, like Redfin, which has sort of had to retrofit its way into that because of when they got started. And there are other places that are just now beginning to get disrupted. The other big category, which is absolutely, to Ann's hype cycle reference earlier, overhyped, but there's a lot to be done, is up above what I'll call sort of the infrastructure layer of big data and big data analytics. And particularly on the analytics front, what we're hearing over and over again, whether it's talking to CIOs, talking to our own portfolio companies, it's like great to do a bunch of pre-processing, do blah, 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 and then I still don't have the insights I'm looking for. And I've spent a decent amount of money, not as much as I used to have to, but I still need to figure out what are the algorithms, what's the algorithm cocktail, how does it apply to my data set, how many times do I have to iterate on that until I get the insights that matter, whether it's a collaborative filtering example, or we could run down a whole list of examples of use cases, and there it is super early days in terms of what you might think of as the analytics lifecycle management world. And I use that term broadly, but I think there's a lot in that over the next 10 years.
Yeah, I think there are some really hard problems left. Certainly, we have a lot of security issues. And so it's been really hard to build security companies. We have a couple really great ones in our portfolio that have thousands of customers, but there are a lot of problems to solve. And people tend to shy away from the security startups because they're hard. But that is increasingly going to be a problem because data is all in motion right now, and there is no such thing as a firewall. I mean, it's just everywhere. And no one actually built security companies from scratch with that in mind. I will also say one caveat is that you shouldn't ask venture capitalists to predict the future because we don't create it, we buy it. We invest in the future. So we are only pattern matchers. We're fortunate that we swim in a world of startups, so we do detect what might be transformative as I think someone said earlier, maybe Jeff Bezos, is you have to invest before the wave hits you. And so we don't know what the great companies will be that are coming next. But there are a shortage of companies who've really thought of mobile first. There's a big app economy, lots of small apps out there, but not a lot of big ideas where people have just said, what really, if there is no PC, or there are no servers, everything's virtualized, and the only thing are all these devices, what kind of companies would I create? Because the people coming to work at these large companies aren't thinking about PCs or servers, they're not even thinking about the cloud. They just think all this stuff works. So we're looking for companies that really have thought through mobile first and as their beginning, as their only lens on how you would invent a company.
Matt, you want to take a stab at predicting the future?
I think the great thing about the technology industry is every 5 to 7 years it reinvents itself and a whole new set of opportunities are developed. And really up and down the stack, wherever you see opportunity or wherever you're feeling pain is where there's a great opportunity to build a new business or build a new product or build a new company. And it's really you guys that see these opportunities from your experiences and parlay them into products and to businesses that become tremendously successful companies. And I just echo everybody's comments on the panel. The things we talk about in Sequoia that we'd love to see more of is we'd love to see more enterprise companies. I mean, you're twice as likely, there's twice as many companies in the past 10 years that have achieved $1 billion valuation in the enterprise space than have in the consumer space. And it's been great to see so many great consumer companies, and even those in our portfolio, that have benefited from the cloud trend. We'd love to see more on the enterprise side. And to Ann's point, specifically mobile-first enterprise applications. This is an area where all you got to do is look at RIM's stock price to see what's happening in the enterprise and see what's happening at your own company or companies your friends may work with. People are getting rid of their BlackBerries. People are getting iPhones and Android devices, and people want to have new ways to interact with those devices to get work done. They got their Kindles and other tablets and so on and so forth. And so we welcome more enterprise-focused opportunities that leverage these shifts in technologies, and anywhere where you might feel particular pain that you see an opportunity.
Matt, you mentioned valuations, so I actually want to touch on that, and we didn't talk about this ahead of time, but there's been some astronomical valuations lately of a lot of startups. One of these guys comes to you to raise some money. You can't do any sort of discounted cash flow analysis. It's much more art than science. What do you look at? What do you look at? How do you begin to determine a valuation you're going to apply to a company? Michael, you want to take a stab? Sure.
I'm really, really simple about this, and I do it on both sides. So both when companies come to me, and then when obviously our companies are out raising. And there's one simple question, which is, what is it that you think you're going to get done with this capital that will justify not what your valuation is now, but where it's going to take you? And if you can answer that question very clearly, I have no problem with your valuation being high. But very few entrepreneurs really take the time to think that out. And then on the other side, I also advise my companies not to go out. And we just had an example today, so I'll quote it. Acquia raised $30 million. That's a lot of money. Why did we raise $30 million? And why did we do this valuation? Well, I didn't determine any of that. I'm just on their board and try to support them. But we were there as a seed investor, and literally thinking about that obviously day one in terms of what would each round look like before we became a public company. And I can tell you that we followed the milestones all the way through, and this round fits a milestone. This is just pre-public. We know that a certain amount of capital will go in. And if you look at all the valuation metrics for a public company, it will be in a certain range. I'm not going to pre-quote it, but I can tell you what it is. And so the right amount of money basically will get us to that valuation. No more, no less. Because everybody wants to invest knowing that they're going to get a return. And if you don't, you're also going to displease them. And even when you go public, the same thing is true. The bankers take you out. They know that if you go out at this range, then obviously there's an upside for everybody in the future. Nobody's going to invest unless they see that upside. So it's not a game. It's actually a science. And there's obviously tremendous challenges along the way that we don't know, like how will you execute and all of those other things. And that's where the risk is. But I wouldn't consider that the valuation. In the end, the one thing I'd love to tell all entrepreneurs, because I was one for 21 years, is do not focus on the dilution. It is totally irrelevant. Which would you rather own, 1% of Apple or 100% of Joe Blow? It's obvious. But people focus way too much on dilution. Focus on building your value.
I appreciate that answer. Matt, any thoughts on that? Would you do it any differently? Or
yeah, I think a couple things I would add is, if you get involved early, typically there are more things that are risky. There are less things that have been de-risked, if you put it another way. And because of that, and being willing to see a category emerging and take a risk on a team, often an unproven team, that you just believe in because you like the way their attributes as an entrepreneurial team, you're going to get in at a lower valuation most of the time. That's kind of the way part of how our world works. On the other hand, there are categories that go in and out of fashion. And what's frustrating sometimes, if you're really passionate about a certain category and you want to try to change that category, it might be a category that's out of fashion that might hurt your valuation. On the other hand, sometimes you're in a category that's in fashion. A couple of years ago, software-defined networks weren't quite in fashion. They are in fashion now. Big data analytics, very much in fashion right now. Enterprise in general, in fashion right now. So some of that valuation negotiation stuff, even though I agree with Michael that it really is something to be focused on less. The third thing is a little bit related to the fashion point, is we've all seen in our lives, whether in the private capital worlds or the public capital worlds, that there often is a disconnect between price and value, either to the high side or to the low side. And so in our point of view is if we're trying to be early and aligned with great entrepreneurs, even if we have to get in a little higher, or sometimes because of fashion and price and value disconnects, we get in a little lower, the real thing is, are we aligned? Do we see the attributes? Jeff mentioned a couple earlier today around being customer-driven and being passionate. I would add to those two a sense of curiosity, increasingly being analytically curious, because you can be every day. And then to add to that is sort of a surprising attribute that we have found over and over again to be a hallmark of success, which is humility. Just a basic humility of, even as you become successful, you still want to maintain curiosity. You still want to maintain respect. You're respectful to your employees, respectful to the market, respectful to the customer. That kind of humility goes a long way in building successful companies over time. And if we can see that early on with folks, we just want to be aligned with them and try to build great companies.
Yeah, please, Matt.
Yeah, I think the way we think about it at Sequoia is when we see a lot of these companies come through that have these larger valuations associated with them, and some we've invested in and some we haven't. And the way we think about it really is, how big is the market? Is the market big enough to viably support a company of the scale that could generate a healthy return based on that valuation? How good is the team associated with the business? And how good is the product that's underlying it all, that making it all work? But the thing that I would just issue as a sense of caution, there's more supply of capital out there than there are brilliant young entrepreneurs building great companies, unfortunately. So it can quickly develop into a situation when you're raising money where you've got people at the table who can pay very high prices and may pay very high prices to be investors in your business. But you're building a partnership with somebody for the long run. So you want to pick your partner based upon who you trust, the network that they're going to be able to bring, the network that their firm is going to be able to bring, the experiences that they or their firm may have had. And so it's just very important to be selective as you're going through that process and be very focused, not just on the valuation you're able to get, but the people that you're able to get around your company to help you to be successful.
Just want to pause for a second and see if there are any questions in the audience. Yeah.
So you said that many of you invest in early stage companies.
Yeah, that's good.
So many of you invest in early stage companies. So my question is, how do you define early stage? Is it when they have reached 1 million users, or is it at the prototype stage? How do you define early stage?
I'll start there. That's a really good question. What is early stage? For venture capital parlance, we use stages called seed, A, and then you B, C, D. So the seed stage is quite relevant these days, and frequently firms like all of ours that start with A rounds see that companies do come to us with a few $100,000 of capital raised from friends, family, or angels. Now, what they've either done with that capital or done without capital is that they today have usually built at least a prototype of the product. For the A round. They have one or two other attributes. They can describe to us if there's any other technical risk to actually complete the product, meaning bring the first version to the customer. They can articulate who the customer is. They may not have any, but they've talked to some. The customer may not have even seen the product. But has been communicated the idea that you have a really clear understanding for that A round, what you believe the assumptions are about the customer value proposition you're going to deliver, what the first version of the product is you're going to deliver in a relatively fast time frame, and you've taken sort of a guess at the general economics of how you would build a business around a product. We at the A round have to fund companies, not just product ideas. Many of the seed round investors fund a lot of products. They're intentionally not intending to fund businesses because they think some of the products will grow to businesses, so they do a large amount of investing over a larger amount of seed deals. We at the A round are committing to help you build a real company. Michael mentioned the company that just raised $30 million. There were rounds before that, including the A round that Michael and his firm did. So we don't require you to have millions of users or any revenue or even any customers. But we really have the expectation that you can think like a customer and build like a developer.
Yes.
So, kind of understanding that investing is formulaic, it's scientific. You can't really put a whole lot of emotion in your decisions. So when it comes to that, how does a startup that's going after a space that's owned by a monster fit into that equation? Like, how dare you consider competing against these guys? You'll never win. It's off the equation. Or if you're going to compete against somebody this big, you need to do something different. How does somebody that has big ambitions fit into your process?
Take a shot at it?
Yeah, please.
I mean, there's absolutely nothing wrong with big ambitions. Actually, we love people who come to us with big, bold ideas. However, it's got to be backed up by something that's fundamentally disruptive, and that might be in the form of a technology or a business model or even a go-to-market approach that gives you a chance to be the David versus Goliath. And if you don't have that, then you got to look in the mirror and say, well, why would I take this on? Never mind us. I mean, we invest money, you invest your life. It's much more important. So I think you just got to have a fundamentally different approach. And if you haven't read the book, The Innovator's Dilemma, I'd highly recommend it. It's a good starting point for you to think about that. So I happen to teach at Harvard, and one of the things I do is I talk about value proposition. It's up on my site. How do you create a fundamentally different value proposition? And the answer is there is a series of things that you have to walk yourself through, and one of them would be checking on exactly the things we're starting to talk about here. Does that give you a sense of it?
Let me give you another cut on that. I think that builds on what Michael said. So you would be amazed, and these are incredibly talented people, the number of times that somebody comes in to tell us a story and they don't do the following. The following is they come in and they talk about a customer-driven problem that they have intimate knowledge into. And why? Because of what's going on in the world. They think they can solve that problem with a team of people they can pull together better than anybody else in the world. So an example of that would be two 26-year-old engineers, and that's all they had at the time we invested in them, that had left Real Networks, and this was at the end of 2000, because when they were deploying the server systems that they built that streamed these songs, which were big files in that day, the storage, which was transactional storage, so read-write intensive, little files, didn't work very well. And they said, we think we can build a distributed file system and take advantage of it on commodity hardware, and we can build this next generation of storage. Even though there are 200 other next generation storage companies out there, and even though there's NetApp in our backyard and EMC. And they did it, and that was Isilon Systems. But it was the fact that they could clearly articulate the customer-driven problem, and they could make the case that they knew the solution to build that was better than anybody else could build in the world. And that's what we're looking for, and that applies really across all the categories. And we're delighted 40% of the deals we do are seed stage deals. That's fine if they can articulate that.
Yeah, I think that's a really important question you've asked because, first of all, we would love if our profession was formulaic. Then we would be just capitalists. We could drop the venture part. But it's not. It's really hard to build companies. And it used to be, when I started as a venture capitalist, the venture capitalists that were around 20 years ago said, well, we look for these 10x companies, that they are 10x faster, or 10x cheaper, or 10x better. That is completely gone. Nobody uses that formula anymore. Innovation doesn't happen on a curve. Suddenly there are disruptors that pop up, and it leaves big companies in stun mode. They will never admit it. And all of us can look at companies that walked in. I think one of the executives is here from MuleSoft. It's a two-person startup, walked in, said, hey, we have an open source enterprise services bus. But let us tell you why that's important now, and why everybody's going to need a new one. And today that company is extremely large, has 200,000 developers worldwide on Mule ESB, hundreds of customers globally. If you flew here in Southwest Airlines, you couldn't get your ticket without MuleSoft. But they articulated, what would happen with a services architecture with all these open APIs and how that would leave very large incumbents, whom I will not name on the stage, behind. And that that so far has been a very successful company from a two-person startup. Because there were disruptors that were changing the markets for the incumbents that they should have been aware of, but they can't change that rapidly. So really it is, as Michael said, what are the ingredients of change that just opens up this market to someone new? And we love when there's a large company that is the competitor. That's much easier than the polluted pond where there's 50 startups that are your competitors.
Thank you very much. That's a great question. Thank you very much. I want to give a little bit of, any of your questions on this side of the room? Okay, great. Go ahead. You had your hand up a couple times.
What is your level of involvement when you say, I want to invest in this company? Are you supplying capital, or are you supplying capital and developers that you know from another field, or are you supplying knowledge? And what is the size at when you build a company like? It has to do with the percentage of shares, or what it has to do with that? Normally, what is your experience with startups like what you find here?
So what's the value add of a VC in addition to just the capital? Yeah.
Free food.
Yeah, that's a
Yeah, you don't want us writing your code.
that's a great question. I mean, I think the way we think about it is it's really what you, the entrepreneur, would like as a level of involvement. It's really up to you to decide. We offer all the services and functionality that you need, and every firm's got different specialties and things that they offer, but at Sequoia we offer help in hiring engineers, we offer help in hiring marketing or HR or business people. We have people around our partnership with different sets of experiences and backgrounds that can be helpful, that you can call on or can be helpful and at your disposal whenever you need them. We have people like Bill Korn, who is the SVP of engineering at Google, who solve very tough technical problems. So people like Jim Getz, who have really strong product experience that they can come and bring you. And so we've worked to develop a partnership where we've got people from all different backgrounds that can be helpful to you, and really it's up to the entrepreneur. Do you want us there every week meeting with you? We're happy to incubate you in our offices. Do you want us once a quarter? It's really at the entrepreneur's discretion, because the last thing we want to do is be over your shoulder, hindering your ability to innovate. We want to give you the best foundation that we can as your investor to support you and help you to be successful on your own.
We have one more question I think we have time for. Yep.
Just wondering what you think of potential change in your own marketplace when it comes to services such as Kickstarter, how that's affecting your change.
That's a great question.
Possibly being moved up there to the venture capital world.
So how the Kickstarters of the world, the crowdfunding models, how it's affecting the venture capital industry. Please.
So I think it's all great news. I really do. I think that anything that can help foster innovation and entrepreneurship and accelerate that is great news. And one of the things that's fun about something like Kickstarter is obviously it's very market-driven and it's customer-driven. But there is a danger with it too. So I think whether it's crowdsourcing or it's a lot of angel funding, the real challenge here is not a capital challenge. In fact, to the question that was just asked, the challenge is how do we help the next great, whatever it might be, founder or entrepreneur build their great company and make it something sustainable and valuable. And it turns out capital is the least important resource in that. And so I think the challenge is going to be filling the gap between what is now a very healthy, early stage seed, crowdfunding, kickstarted model, and getting the entrepreneurs the support that it takes to go from building a product to taking it to market, to getting it repeatable, to making it scalable, to figuring out how to make it profitable, and then get it enduring. And ultimately, when you do all of those things and you put it all back together again and you look back, it's usually about an 8-year overnight success. And the last company I took public was Demandware, which we took out earlier this year. And everybody was like, wow, that was a huge success. Well, I'm not going to go into the details of it, but there were times where you could have easily said this is never going to work. And that's true of probably almost every venture. So the really critical thing is what do you do when it goes wrong? And what are the lessons that you can learn from people who've been through that? And what are the tough times that you're going to have to persevere? And it's got nothing to do with capital. So my answer to your question is I think it's great, but I don't think it's all of the answer. I think it's a piece of the puzzle.
Thank you. Well, unfortunately, we are out of time. One shameless quick plug. Everyone here should be applying to the Startup Challenge. You got 7 days left, I think it is. Great opportunity to win $100,000 in cash and AWS credits. So love to see your application. Thank you all very much. I'm sure these guys will stick around a little bit if you have more questions.